Over the last 24 hours, the Detroit Lions fans, the media, and really everybody outside of the organization has made comments and stipulations and, talked about this potential massive move that the Detroit Lions could make. The fact that not only is a player like Myles Garrett available on the trade block, but that the Detroit Lions via Vegas are the odds on favorite to make the trade. Now, for those of you that are new to the channel or those of you that may be their first video here, I am fairly pessimistic when it comes to trades. I didn't really entertain the Max Crosby stuff. I didn't really entertain the Buda Baker rumors before the season last year. Very rarely do I think a trade makes sense for the Detroit Lions. And very rarely do I even make videos talking about those trades because it would just be 10 minutes of me explaining why the trade makes no sense. And that, quite honestly, isn't very fun. So, I am somebody who is very cautious when it comes to speaking on trade allegations and speaking on players joining the Detroit Lions for capital. But in this scenario, I actually think that the Detroit Lions could make it work. Now, don't get me wrong, the picks would get tight, the money would get tight, the, 2026 would look a little bit bleaker, but I do think that there is not only a possibility, but a realistic possibility that the Detroit Lions could trade for Myles Garrett and actually find a way to put him, Aiden Hutchinson, and Aleem McNeil on the same defensive line while paying all three. So, with that being said, let's take a look. Let's go through the numbers. Let's take a look at what makes this trade not only possible, but realistic from a money standpoint and from different, viewpoints. And then we'll talk about whether or not the Detroit Lions should do it. So, first off, there are four big questions to this, right? How many picks will it take? How much money will it take? And how much money will the Lions have left? Is it possible? And then is it likely? Now, taking a look at how many picks it would cost, I took a look at the Khalil Mack trade, a trade that happened 7 seasons ago, believe it or not, and is one of the biggest trades as of recent history, right? It's a trade for a elite pass rusher, a defensive player of the year, somebody who is still younger than 30, but getting up there in age just a little bit, right? Khalil Mack was 27 when he was traded. Myles Garrett will be 29. So I think that that is the kind of mold that we should build this trade off of. And in that trade back in 2018, the Raiders gave away Khalil Mack in exchange for a first round pick in 2019, a first round pick in 2020, a third round pick in 2020, and a 2019 sixth round pick, while the Chicago Bears got Khalil Mack, a 2020 round second, and a 2020 fifth round pick. So, yes, they gave away multiple firsts, but they got a player and a second and a fifth round pick. And overall, the compensation really wasn't all that bad. From 2014 to 2017, Khalil Mack was fantastic. A two-time Pro Bowler, a Defensive Player of the Year, a two-time All-Pro with 40 and a half sacks and 68 TFLs. This, again, keep in mind, is in his rookie contract within just a 4-year span. So when we compare him to Myles Garrett, the numbers are going to look a little different, but it's just as impressive, if not even more. In his 8-year career, Myles Garrett is a 6-time Pro Bowler, a 4-time first-team All-Pro, a Defensive Player of the Year with 102 and a half sacks and 116 TFLs. He has been one of the most dominant players on the defensive line in the NFL for the better part of a decade, and really since entering the NFL back in 2018, I want to say. He has been one of the best pass rushers and one of the best players that the NFL has to offer. Now, in this mock trade scenario, I have it looking something like this. I think that the Lions might have to give up just a little bit more, potentially throwing Hendon Hooker on there, or maybe even another first round pick, somewhere in between that. But I don't think that this is a bad trade at all. Where the Detroit Lions give up their first round pick this year, the 28th overall pick, their 2026 second and third round selections, and they get Myles Garrett and 2 sixth round picks in return. Now, the only reason I don't have 2 first round picks is that Myles Garrett is 29. He's 2 years older than Khalil Mack was, which means they have 2 less years to utilize him. His contract extension will be coming up, so that could potentially drive down prices. And Myles Garrett made it very clear he's not playing in Cleveland next year, right? There is no possibility that he returns to the Browns, which could drive down his price as well. I don't think Cleveland's going to give him away by any stretch of the imagination, but getting a first, second, and third round pick and potentially a quarterback that was very highly regarded coming out of college football in Hendon Hooker could be enough to sway Cleveland to make that deal, especially if Myles Garrett speaks up and says, "Hey, I want to go to Detroit," right? I think that that logic applies anywhere. If Myles Garrett says, "I want to go to Philadelphia," if I want to go to Minnesota, I want to go to San Francisco, whatever the case may be, I think that if he picks a spot and says publicly, "I want to be here," that could drive down the price as well. I think a first, second, third, and a backup quarterback that would probably start in Cleveland over Deshaun Watson is a fair value for the 29-year-old pass rusher. But again, you could argue a little bit more, even throw another first round pick on there, and you could still be within your rights to make that deal. Now, taking a look at cap space, because that, of course, is very important in this scenario. The Detroit Lions this year have $42.5 million in cap. Next year, it gets a little bit tight. They get $32 million in cap space as some of those Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, Jared Goff deals start to kick in. And then they jump up in 2027, have $114.6 million to spend. This offseason, they have a couple of guys to re-sign: Kevin Zeitler, Tim Patrick, Derek Barnes, Ifeatu Melifonwu, and Carlton Davis. You have a couple others like Dan Skipper in the mix. Kyle Pico's in the mix, could get re-signed. John Kaminsky's in the mix. So there are players to re-sign, but nobody should be that expensive. Carlton Davis will be by far the most expensive, but even then, I don't think he would get the top tier like Pat Surtain money, but I do think he'd be a pretty high level NFL cornerback type of money. Taking a look at the next offseason in 2026, the Detroit Lions have a lot to pay. They have Hutchinson, they have JMO, they have Branch, Laporta, Anzalone, Joseph, Bates, Raymond, but those contracts would take effect in 2026, but they could backload those contracts a little bit and spend most of that money in 2027 and beyond as the cap space keeps going up and up and up. So really, the cap space isn't the biggest issue here, right? The cap space will get tight, especially in 2026, as some of the other big deals start to take effect, but they can push those things down the line. They can move money around, they can restructure, they can do a lot of things to manipulate the cap, and they have a lot of cap space to work with over the next 3 seasons. So if the trade does go through, what kind of picks are the Detroit Lions working with? Well, in 2025, they would have the 60th pick 101, 132, 165, 198, 230, and 246. While in 2026, they'd have a first, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. Now, if you do throw in the first round pick from 2026, I think you could potentially get maybe higher than pick 165 or higher than the sixth round pick. If give that first round pick, maybe you potentially get a third round pick back in return in 2026. So it could change things around. But I think this is roughly the number of picks that the Detroit Lions would have, right? They are going to have at least 5 to 6 picks in this year's draft, even if they're all late with 1 second round and a bunch of day 3 picks. I think that they still very much have enough draft capital to bring in some solid rookies, right? Bring in the next Amon-Ra St. Brown, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Derek Barnes, Christian Mahogany, or, Malcolm Rodriguez or Kirby Joseph. Those are all players that were drafted after the 100th overall pick, right? You have 6 of those picks, if nothing else. Going in next year, if you can get a third round pick in return, right? Maybe swap thirds or do something of that nature, give the compensatory pick or something like that. You still go into the draft with potentially a first round pick, but if not, say a third, say 2/3, a fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, that is not a great draft class, but it's still enough to get young players and young contracts under contract. So with that being said, yeah, this trade is feasible. This trade is not only possible, but wouldn't put the Detroit Lions in that poor of a situation. Let's go all out and say that the Detroit Lions really want Myles Garrett and they really want to give away that first round pick in 2026, and they absolutely have to. The Lions get nothing back but that sixth round pick, right? A bare minimum, I think that you could ask for. The Detroit Lions still have the 60th pick, 101, 132, 165, 198, 230, and 246 this year. That is 7 picks that the Detroit Lions have to make, an entire draft class, most of which is on day 3, but still, Brad Holmes can do it. And then going into next year, you still have 5 selections, assuming you don't trade down from 60, in the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, where you can find talent and get quality players. In a worst case scenario, the Detroit Lions aren't put in that poor of a situation. I think the biggest catch is going to be cap space, right? Whether they can afford it through 2026. But like I said, they can move money around, they can roll stuff over, they can push contracts, they can renegotiate. And in 2027, the cap space opens up pretty significantly for the Lions as they move forward and look to keep their window open. Myles Garrett would make this team a Super Bowl contender. I think they already are a Super Bowl contender, but Myles Garrett would make them the clear favorites going into 2025. You go in with an offense of Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, St. Brown, Jamo, Laporta, and that offensive line on offense, who just put up a top 5 offensive performance season of all time just this past year, with a brand new coaching staff, but a coaching staff that is familiar with the system, knows how to run it, knows how to call it. And then you go on defense with potentially a better play caller at defensive coordinator, with Aiden Hutchinson healthy, Aleem McNeil healthy, DJ Reader healthy, Myles Garrett healthy, with the linebackers of Anzalone and Campbell and Rodriguez and Barnes, and then the secondary of Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. You have Ennis Rakestraw coming back to start in the slot. You have Terrion Arnold in year 2 looking to develop potentially a free agent cornerback that could fill in for Carlton Davis if he's too expensive to sign. That defense is going to get much better than they were a season ago. And the offense should not take a big step back. If you add Myles Garrett, you open a Super Bowl window. You open the opportunity to take one, potentially even 2 Super Bowls over the next 2 seasons. And although it would get tight, and although there would be people upset about it, I think it's feasible. I think it's possible. And not only is it possible, but it doesn't put you in that bad of a situation. Knowing how good Brad Holmes can draft on day 3, I feel comfortable giving him 4, 5, 6 picks on day 3 and letting him find role players, letting him find depth players, letting him find young, cheap contracts to take over when some of those lofty, pricey veterans start to age out. I think it's possible. It needs a lot of things to go right. It needs Brad Holmes to continue to draft extremely well. But with his track record, I think that that's more likely to happen than not. And again, if it's for a Super Bowl, that's the ultimate goal. That's what you want to do. And winning a Super Bowl in Detroit would cement him in Detroit probably forever. So, with that being said, that is live for you guys today. Again, I think it's a good trade. I think it would be a good trade depending on what they gave up. The Lions have a ton of draft picks to work with, which is what makes this possible. Saying F them picks and getting rid of, first and second and third round picks still leave you with 5 or 6 picks per class over the next 2 seasons. So it's possible, it's feasible. And honestly, I think this is one that the Detroit Lions can get done. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll take a look if it actually does happen. But I wanted to give my opinion. I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit, kind of, give the realistic aspect of it, put it back in the trade. And I think that we did that. So with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about the Myles Garrett trade scenario, whether you do it, what you'd be willing to give up, and how badly you would like it to happen. I'm curious to hear your guys' opinions and thoughts. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.